Hello, everybody. It is Super Bowl Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by Ray Fittipaldo, our Steelers insider, for our weekly Steelers mock draft tracker video, recapping the week in Steelers mock draft picks from around the internet. It's an active week with the Super Bowl going on, lots of people getting involved in that conversation. So we're going to break it all down. Ray, we're going to be talking cornerbacks at the top of the show. Will Johnson, a name this week. Benjamin Morrison, Azareye'h Thomas. It's a position of, I think, some level of need for the Steelers, but I'm curious to see how important you put that position in the pecking order. Before we get into that, we just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast, Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Ray, let's just get into it big picture, talking about the need at cornerback before we talk about any of these individuals. We spent a big chunk of last season talking about potential cornerback picks in the first round or early rounds of the draft. Nothing has really changed structurally in that sense. You have Joey Porter Jr. as your one, truly proven commodity that's on the roster for next season. Do you think that they will take a cornerback that high given all of their other needs, or do you still look at defensive line, receiver right now until we get through free agency as the big areas of need?
I think defensive line and receiver are bigger needs as I look at it, but I will admit, you mentioned that Joey Porter is a starter, but Dante Jackson, his contract expired. Cam Sutton's contract expired. Now you do have Beanie Bishop in the slot. He played well at times this year, so you wouldn't necessarily have to draft two corners, but you definitely going to need an outside corner. And yeah, I wouldn't say first round. I mean, I wouldn't rule out first round, but I'm thinking more second round, third round. You grab a corner and, you go from there. It's interesting. You see of all the guys you mentioned, I think Benjamin Morrison is the one where there's the most debate on. You have seen him in some first round mocks, but I've also seen him in second round mocks. I've seen him in the 40s and some of these top 50 prospect lists that are out there. So, maybe you can get a guy like Morrison in the second round in the 50s or somebody like him, and you wouldn't necessarily have to ignore your bigger needs at defensive line or at receiver in the first round.
Ray, where does Corey Trice fit into this conversation? Because I know they love him in that room. They had him matched up on Ja'Marr Chase for a long stretch of that game against the Bengals late in the season. He's kind of, fits the prototype of what they were looking for in Joey Porter Jr. A lot of people wanted to make that comparison when he was drafted. So, is he a viable option to be that other guy on the outside? Or do you look at him as a former 7th round pick and say you have to backfill him in some way, and if things don't work out, have a guy who can grow into that role across from Joey Porter?
Yeah, I think they view him as better than a 7th round pick. He has a long history injury both in the NFL and at Purdue, and I think the reason his draft stock fell so much was because he was so off injured, and he had a lot of injuries that teams were worried about as he went through the pre-draft process. But if he can get healthy, Adam, I think he is a viable option to at least contend for that starting spot, opposite Joey Porter. He's got the size, he's got the length. Even though Ja'Marr Chase put up some really good numbers in that game, I thought Trice battled. Burrow didn't shy away from that matchup. He went at him a lot. I thought, Trice also won, 1 or 2 reps there throughout that game. So, I'm not saying that he's going to develop into a shutdown guy or even a starter, but I think you could feel comfortable with him going into training camp, competing for that job. And then, like we said, likely second, third round pick, somebody will be brought in to compete with him for that starting job, because let's face it, he's played 6 games out of a possible, 34, 36 games here over the first 2 years of his career. You can't count on him because of his injury history to be that guy. He's got to go out there and prove it.
Will Johnson was a name that stuck out to me this week, Ray. It was Eric Edholm of NFL.com who mocked him to the Steelers. Big playmaker for Michigan, had a lot of interceptions, had several pick sixes, was a huge piece of their national title team in 2023. But he did get injured and missed a big chunk of this past season. Eric Edholm also had some speed concerns. I guess wants to see him test well here in the offseason program. If he's available, right? Because right now, a lot of mocks I'm seeing, he doesn't get out of the top 5. Jacksonville, I think, at number 5 specifically is a huge landing spot for him.
Yeah.
But if for some reason he takes a tumble, is he the caliber of player that forces you to reevaluate, need versus best available?
Yeah, I mean, that would be like Aaron Rodgers type of fall if you're going from 5 to 21. So I don't know if that will happen. We'll see how he tests. But yeah, I mean, if he's available and they have a high grade on him, then I definitely think it would be a possibility. I think what the Steelers do every offseason is they backfill their roster with starter-capable players in free agency. So they're going to make moves at corner. They're going to make moves at receiver. They're going to make moves at defensive tackle. So they're not in a position come April 25th when the draft starts that they have to pick one of those positions. They're going to pick one of those positions. They're going to pick the best player at one of those positions, the highest graded player, on their board. So I think that's the likely way that it'll work out. And that's the great thing about the draft. Like, at this time last year, or even a week or two before the draft, I didn't think Troy Fautanu would fall to the Steelers. He ended up falling. You saw him in in the range of 12 to 20, and he fell all the way to 24. So you never know what's going to happen in the draft. Some teams shy away from people who have injuries, histories. The Steelers, sometimes, I don't want to say take gambles, but sometimes their medical information, their doctors approve things that maybe other teams don't. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I wouldn't rule that out, especially a player of that caliber. If he falls that far, you would definitely have to think about it.
Ray, you talked a little bit about Benjamin Morrison. I think Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State are both in that same category of fringe first rounders. I see them slip into the back end a lot of times. I've seen them in the second round and multi-round mocks. Rarely do I see them going, higher than 21, or, where they're getting picked by the Steelers is the highest they're getting picked in mock drafts. How do you feel about the depth of the position in this draft? Because I think it's starting to remind me of the draft in which you got Joey Porter Jr., in which there were a bunch of guys in that conversation of, are they going to get picked in the 20s of the first round? Are they going to get picked in the first 15 picks of the second round? Is it less important who the individual is and more important that there are multiple options? Or how are you looking at that group through that lens of how they ended up with Joey Porter Jr.?
Yeah, I think it's a good group of corners. I think just because other positions are valued more in the NFL, I think corners tend to fall until later, mid to late first round for those top prospects. You have good ones that will fall into the second round as well, as Joey Porter did, a couple of years ago. So quarterbacks are always going to shoot up draft boards. Edge rushers are going to shoot up draft boards. Even defensive tackles, I think, probably have higher value now because of the importance of rushing the passer than maybe corners do. So I think you'll see there might be like a super elite corner that goes top 10, but if you look at him, where did Christian Gonzalez go a couple of years ago? Like, Gonzalez was kind of viewed like as a top 10 talent, but I think the Patriots got him like at 14 or 15 or 16, wherever they were picking that year. So one of those guys might be available to the Steelers, but also I think there's going to be that second tier of guys who also could be there in the second round as well.
Ray, Matt Miller from ESPN had the Steelers going with Emeka Egbuka and Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. We talked about Egbuka last week. I think he's as close to the consensus guy for the Steelers as there is at this stage of the process. I'm seeing him in a ton of mocks for the Steelers. I'd like to talk about Judkins, but I wanted to get your opinion on Egbuka here as an option. Great route runner, but also not like even the best receiver on his own team last season, playing next to Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah, I mean, he's got special teams value, but when you're the number 2 receiver on your college team, you're probably not going to be a number 1 in the NFL, and that just goes to value. When you have a first-round pick at number 21, do you want to shoot for that higher ceiling, so to speak, with a prospect, or do you want to play it safe? Like I think Egbuka would be a very safe pick. I think he would be a starter, and by all accounts, or an early starter, a guy who you can count on for years. But by all accounts, he doesn't have that number one type of ability. You just see that he's going to be a really good number two for you. So it just probably is going to go to how they view the value and when they want to pull the trigger on a guy like that. I think this is a good group of receivers. I don't know about the depth. I don't know if you can get a guy like Egbuka in the second round. That might be a stretch. So it's going to be an interesting decision. We know they have to build up that room. It needs a complete overhaul. So there's definitely a need there, and I won't roll it out in the first round. But they haven't done it since Santonio Holmes in 2006. So it would be a little bit of a departure from how they have approached the drafts for the last 2 decades or so.
Yes, and at times they've hit, and you look at Antonio Brown and say, those are the guys you can get late in the draft, but they seem to have lost their touch in that regard a little bit اتely, Ray. So, is this the space where you finally have to bite the bullet and use a first round pick at that position, just given the way things are? Running back's also a need, Ray, but is round 2 too early? I know I've listened to several of your radio hits, and you're looking at round 3, round 4.
Yeah.
Quinshon Judkins is also really good. So how do you place a player of his caliber on the continuum of where the value fits in today's NFL, where you just went through the experience with Najee Harris. If you used a first round pick on him, he never became the star. He was a workhorse. He got some things done, but he was never that dude. He was not the Saquon Barkley of the Steelers for this last handful of years. So round 2, I guess, starting there, how do you see the value lining up with what the Steelers need?
Yeah, so of course we have to mention Jerry Dulac's story from Friday, where he suggested that the Steelers do have interest in bringing Najee Harris back. So if that happens, obviously they're not going to take a guy like Judkins in the second round. I think they would still draft a running back, but then it would definitely be day 3. So that would be a very interesting decision. I think it would be against the grain of what they were thinking probably 9 months ago when they decided not to pick up his option. So that certainly is going to play a part in this. But, for me, second round is probably too early. This is a very deep running backs class. So if you can get all you need is a guy to pair with Jaylen Warren. You don't need that Ashton Genty type of a number 1 running back. Everyone uses 2-3 running backs now. So as long as you could get a starter capable guy, 3rd round, 4th round, I think that's probably the way a lot of teams are thinking. And we'll see if the Steelers are thinking in that same way.
Well, and you do have, you hope Jaylen Warren in your back pocket. And so whoever you're drafting, you're not necessarily drafting to be the bell cow, 30 carries a game type of guy. You're looking for someone to pair with Jaylen Warren. So I think that makes it a little bit easier for them as well. Pro Football Focus had an interesting 7-round mock draft this week. Xavier Restrepo in round 2 was, I think, the most interesting name to start with from that one. Cam Ward's go-to guy, very explosive numbers at Miami. But does he have what you think the Steelers are looking for? He's 5'10", 198. Is he too much like Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson to be viewed as not duplicative with what the Steelers already have?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the Steelers, and depending on what they decide to do with George Pickens, you could say they need everything because, Calvin Austin is a nice player, but is he ever going to be anything more than a number 3 or a number 4? I'm not even sure he's an established number 3 at this point. And we have no idea what Roman Wilson's going to be. So if you're not sure on those guys, maybe he would be the guy. He's definitely produced for Miami. Was a good player there. So we'll see what happens. But they waited to the 3rd round to get a guy like Wilson. Do you really want to go up and get a guy in the 2nd round with similar size? We'll see. He would have to be really well liked within the scouting department if the Steelers would do that. I think if they're going to take a receiver on the first 2 days of the draft, for me, I would want a guy who's probably going to replace Pickens more so than another guy who's going to play slot. or being number 2. That's what I would do. I would rather get a number 1 type with an early pick than just another guy who's going to compete to be a 2, 3, 4, or 5.
Rylie Mills from Notre Dame is a name Steelers fans may know from their playoff run. A really good player, kind of the heart of that defense for most of the season. Gets injured in the playoff game against Indiana. Plays more on the inside. Is he on your defensive line radar at all as a guy you think could be viable for the Steelers? Or are there too many concerns there that you'd want to go in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, not early, but and I think most people think the Steelers will use a day 1 or a day 2 pick on a defensive lineman just because they're so deficient in that area. But yeah, you mentioned he's a good player, and hey, listen, Adam, maybe they want to double up on defensive linemen, and they want to take 2 in this draft. If they take 2, he could be the second. I wouldn't be against that. They do have 8 draft picks, so double up at receiver, double up at defensive line. I wouldn't mind either of those 2 scenarios.
Will Howard is the 4th-round pick in this 7-round mock. Caught my eye. A proven winner. I think probably a limited skill set is the best way to describe him. He kind of is like reminds me of Sean Clifford of Penn State in that regard. Of can shepherd a really good team, but isn't necessarily a difference maker himself. Is that the type of quarterback you're talking about in this draft? Or are you looking for someone with a little bit more upside who could be a viable start at some point if the chips fall? I personally see Will Howard as like a career backup. It could probably be a good backup, but not necessarily someone that I would draft with an eye toward him developing into a number 1 for you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think he was athletic enough in college to be a mobile quarterback and to make plays with his legs, but I think that would go away against NFL defenders. So if Mike Tomlin truly is looking for that mobility aspect to be, a definite in the evaluation process, I have questions of whether, he would be any different than Kenny Pickett in that regard. Pickett was a good athlete in college. We all know the fake slide and the long touchdown run and all that, but has Kenny Pickett done anything but run in circles in the backfield since coming to the NFL? And the answer is no. He doesn't really factor into the game plan as a running quarterback. So, impressed with Howard. Did a really good job with a stacked, $20 million roster around him, whatever that number was. So, yeah, nice player, but I don't think he's, maybe you take a flyer on him 4th or 5th round, but I wouldn't do it before that.
Yeah, I think Jalen Milroe is kind of the baseline, Ray, of what we're talking about. Of like, if things work out with him, can you see him being like a Jalen Hurts in the NFL and that level? And I think that's what I'm looking for if you're going to use a pick in the mid rounds there on a quarterback. Will Howard to me reminds me of Landry Jones or some of these guys that were brought in to clearly be the backups to Ben Roethlisberger. Mason Rudolph would fit in that category. Will Howard is not the guy I would ever expect to start for the Steelers. Last name that stuck out to me in the 7-round mock was Kalel Mullings from Michigan. Obviously, I don't think he's as good as like a Blake Corum and some of these other guys who've come out of Michigan in recent years, but he did have 116 yards against Ohio State in that game in November. Was a huge part of their ability to upset this Buckeyes team that goes on to win the national championship. Is he exactly the prototype of what we're talking about? As a guy you can take a flyer on, who you can hopefully plug into your lineup, but that you're not necessarily looking at to be, a star of your team the way you did with Najee Harris.
Yeah, like one of those guys in a very deep class. I saw one of these draft analysts say, even if you don't need a running back this year, take one because it's that good of a class. And even if this guy ends up being your number 3 as a rookie, with the attrition in the NFL, you'll have another really good player on your roster. So I think this guy had draftable grades on, I think, more than 32 running backs. I think it was more than, 32. So when you look at it that way, I think the Steelers are definitely going to take one. I think middle rounds is that spot. So that's probably a sweet spot for him as well.
Yeah, I think Mullings has all the makings of that guy that a lot of people haven't heard of or thought of. If you don't watch college football, that he's one of those people you've never heard of, and then there's an injury that happens in a backfield, and everyone is scrambling to get him for fantasy football teams. That's what I think we've seen that a lot with San Francisco in the past year with how things played out with Christian McCaffrey. I think Kalel Mullings could be that guy in a revamped Steelers backfield. Ray, anything else standing out to you in the world of mock drafts and trends this week, either individual names or big picture things you're noticing?
No, like you said, like Egbuka is still a popular pick for the Steelers. You see a lot of the same names, a lot of the same positions. Defensive tackle, receiver. I honestly don't think that's going to change much. The only thing that'll change that, I think, maybe is if the Steelers make a splash in free agency for the next 2 months, 2.5 months until draft day. Get ready to see those D tackles and those receivers mocked to the Steelers at number 21.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised how few D tackles I've seen these first couple of weeks that we've been doing this. Sometimes what people perceive nationally to be needs are not necessarily what lines up locally. So I'll be curious to see when. We talk a lot about defensive linemen around here. When do the national trends start to line up with that? But Ray, thank you so much for joining me this week. We're going to be back, folks. I will be hosting the North Shore Drive podcast on Monday. We're also going to have Brian Bacco, Chip Tamlin football on Tuesday. Jason Mackey will be back with his show on Thursday. And of course, this show will be back next week. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss anything. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And otherwise, enjoy the big game today. We'll talk to you again on Monday.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.